Great.
Okay, now you should be able to hear me.
Okay, cool.
Can you hear me now?
Cool. All right. Hi.
Hi?
Okay,
There we go.
now you were able to hear me.
Okay,
All
I
right.
know why
Good.
this happened.
Good.
But
All right. Hi everybody. How's it going? Yeah, we have Guppy from Fred Hutch here. So hi Guppy. How's it going? How about you introduce yourself a bit?
Hi, Floa. Hi, Pika. Thank you so much for having me back. I am the scientific content strategist at Fred Hutch, and my job is to know all the science that's going on at the Hutch and sort of bring it to everybody out there. And so I'm excited to come talk to you about COVID-19 and, pick up where we left off 6 months ago, which was a really fun experience as well. So I'm so happy to be back.
yes, indeed. Because for those that didn't know, we also had an interview with Guppy back during summer 2020, and things have changed a lot since then. Because back in May of 2020, and the perspective there was, I guess, at Fred Hutch and how it is right now is quite different. So, would you like perhaps to first off to introduce for those that are not completely aware what it is that you guys do at Fred Hutch, and how, like, the past 6 months, like how things have evolved since the last time we talked?
Yeah, thanks, Pika. So, just for those who don't know, Fred Hutch is a cancer center up in Seattle. So, we are known for our cancer research and our treatments, which include the bone marrow transplant, which was pioneered at the Hutch, and immunotherapy, which came out of the bone marrow transplant. But what people don't realize is that about 25% of our research is in viruses. And that's because when we started doing research into cancer therapies, what the creator of the bone marrow transplant discovered was that people were dying due to infection. So he got an infectious disease researcher, and that group grew, and that group grew. And so 25% of our research is in viruses and infectious diseases. And so when the pandemic hit in January, February, we had researchers who were already tracking the virus, and we were the first to raise the alarm about transmission, and we tracked the virus early on. But as this pandemic has evolved, other elements of the Hutch have come to the fore. So the other thing people don't realize as well is that the Hutch is the coordinating center for the HIV vaccine trials network. So we are a group, so we coordinate all the vaccines that are being created for HIV, and then host trials all around the world, trying to make sure that we have the right people who are getting the vaccine to make sure that the vaccine works. And we sort of standardize the process to make sure that whatever HIV vaccine we come up with is standardized. And because we have this infrastructure, the US government and companies called and said, hey, can you coordinate the vaccine trials for coronavirus? And so we've become the coordinating center for Operation Warp Speed, which is going on in the US to fast track the testing of 5 different vaccines in the US and around the world. So we are now taking a leading role in testing those vaccines that many of you have probably heard about in the news. And I won't say more because I'll let Pika and Floa ask questions about what they want to know about the vaccine.
Yeah, just since you already mentioned that, yeah, we indeed in the past few weeks there were several news about vaccine trials being highly effective. So you mentioned in our last interview that we should watch out for things such as long-term side effects, which are a large part of the difficulty of making these vaccines. So, what exactly is your opinion on these trials, and are there like any misconceptions about what is happening with all of it that you think that are maybe worth talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's been super promising, and I'm not going to hide the fact that it is amazing that we have 3 vaccines already that are really showing really tremendous efficacy. So Pfizer is not part of Operation Warp Speed. They opted not to come in with government money because they felt that it would slow them down. But they are showing 90% effectiveness. Moderna, which is in Operation Warp Speed, is also showing about 90 to 95% effectiveness. And we can compare those two a little bit more later. And the most recent result is from AstraZeneca. That trial was done in combination between the UK and Brazil. And there's a little bit of oddity between those two trials. So the two trials show some very different results, and I want to be cautious not to overstate, but there is some potential promise, but we just have to wait and see on those two. The other piece I would say, so the piece that I would definitely say is when they say 90% effective, what they're saying is 90% effective at preventing disease from SARS-CoV-2, so preventing the disease COVID-19. It is not saying that it is effective at preventing infection. We don't know the answer as to whether it's effective at preventing infection yet. We need to wait and we need to collect more data. What we know is that people with the vaccine are not getting sick from the disease, but we don't know that they are not getting the virus and able to transmit the virus. And that is, I think that's still missing in the communications, but it may be true, but we just need to wait on that.
All right. So just a general reminder here for chat as well. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask Guppy, just post them in chat. We are happy to relay them to Guppy so that he can answer them as well. So something that I still have here on my notes is that you've previously said in our interview in summer that the coronavirus can be viewed similar to a family tree, so that it has similar structures over multiple entities. So in how far has this helped or hurt the research of a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what you're alluding to is some of the work that one of our epidemiologists, Trevor Bedford, has done. So what they do is they're able to sequence the virus that's present in everybody's nose. So read the genetic material to know how that virus is made. And by reading that, you can say, oh, this person's virus is more similar to this person's virus, or this person likely got it from this person. Because as the virus moves through people, there's some errors that are introduced in a book. It's like taking a book, copying it, but introducing an error every few times that you copy it. And so the words read different. And so by doing that, what we've been able to see is that the virus is changing, but it's not like the flu, which changes very rapidly and there's many changes all at once. This virus is not changing as much, which has given a ton of optimism to the vaccine. That, one of the reasons we need a flu shot every year is the flu virus keeps changing and changing, and so the vaccine from the previous year may not be as effective the next year or the year after that. With this, we're fairly confident that whatever vaccine we make will be effective for a long time because this virus isn't changing as much. Or if it's able to change, it's not able to change enough to evade whatever vaccines we make for it. So fingers crossed, maybe there's a lot of optimism that reading this family tree, we can say, if we get a vaccine, we have a good shot of taking this on.
Indeed. Okay, I just think I hear an echo here, but okay, it's fine. I think that's really important what you're saying here about the fact that the mutation of the virus, which doesn't actually change as much. Because I see a question in chat, which actually relates exactly to what I was going to ask back. Because, for instance, Nordic Soy here is asking, how has research evolved as the virus has mutated? For example, the recent findings about COVID infections in the mink populations of Denmark. So I guess since you say that, for instance, COVID doesn't change as much as something like the flu, I guess has different implications in that regard?
Yeah, so there's two different things. One is that it's able to jump from animals to humans, and that's the problem with the mink. And one of the fears is that if it goes into the mink population or the animal population, it could spread through the animal population and make many changes while it's in the animal population, because it's possibly going through more animals because we're not stopping it really. And so imagine rolling a dice, right? Like if you roll a dice and it's a 6, it's a bad outcome. It's a 1, it's a great outcome. Or, no, if it's a 6, it's a bad outcome, and all the others are good outcomes. And with each passage through humans, you're rolling the dice, and every so often you'll get a 6, and the virus will change. But when it goes through minks, you're sort of rolling the dice many, many times over because you're not stopping it. And so the probability that you'd get mutations goes up and up. And so that's a different set of issues that once it goes through the animal population, it may get changed a lot before it comes back to humans. But we're optimistic that
Okay.
the way that the virus enters our body is through something called the spike protein. And that spike protein is really what we're targeting with the vaccines. And that's what's so good about the early vaccine results, is the 90% effectiveness is targeting the spike protein. We have many more vaccine trials coming targeting exactly that same spike protein. And there should be no reason that those other vaccine trials are not as successful as the first ones, because that spike, it can't change very much without compromising the function of the virus. And so the hope is that even if it changes, we should be okay because of what we're targeting.
Okay, I see. Yeah, definitely sounds scary. That whole rolling dice, indeed, the thing that you're talking about. But I think I can understand more what you're talking about now, and that makes sense. Because I think we always. Sometimes there are things sometimes we just don't really necessarily understand about how a virus spreads and how it mutates. So I think it's good that you're talking about it here so that we can have a bit more understanding all on our side of how it actually works.
One of the fears though is that it is fundamentally possible that there's maybe a mink coronavirus that is different from the human, and some mixture happens between the two, leading to a weird virus. But I don't know whether that is the real fear at the moment with the jump into minks.
I see. Just basically doesn't seem like the principal fear, does it? Okay, see, we've got some more questions here. We've got one from Lego6245 saying, what are some of the scientific techniques used to analyze a virus like this? Are the techniques different from other viruses being studied, or is it largely the same process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, that's one of the reasons why we've been able to take on this virus so quickly, is that, we've had researchers at the Hutch who have been studying other coronaviruses, and other researchers who have been studying things like the flu, that we've basically taken the techniques that we use for other viruses and applied it to this virus, which is why we've been able to make such jumps so quickly. And honestly, we can't say enough as to how important it's been that the Hutch has been working in HIV for all these years. All the vaccine platforms that you're seeing being used now are really a function of all the work that's been done in the HIV vaccine. And I can go into that more if you have more questions.
Yeah, actually, something I wanted to ask about earlier was regarding basically the facilities you have at Fred Hutch, because I was reading just a few days ago. Let me just get it here. That Fred Hutch opened a first-of-its-kind space for COVID-19 clinical research. It says being one of the United States' first standalone centers dedicated to studying antiviral drugs, monoclonal antibodies, and other emerging therapies for COVID-19. And in that regard, you already talked about how the past of Fred Hutch already helped so much about having those facilities, and in general, how would you say having those facilities help with the research, if that question makes any sense? Or I'm not sure if what I say here makes sense, but do you get what I mean? Or
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great question, right? Like we've had facilities to study viruses like HIV and the flu, which has allowed us to really quickly, we've had an antibody facility where we can test whether we can extract certain things in the blood called antibodies, which are part of our immune system, and see whether the antibodies that are have worked against previous versions of coronavirus also work for this one. And now because of our leadership in with coronavirus, we were able to build this center, like you mentioned, the COVID-19 Clinical Research Center, where we can test treating early. 6 months ago, you and I talked about this, Pika, the idea that if we can find a way to treat people early, we may not even need a vaccine, right? Like if we can prevent people from getting really, really sick, and just if somebody tests positive, we send them a drug, they take it, they don't go to the hospital, and suddenly that makes this a lot less bad. And so we managed to start up that clinical trial center. I think only took a couple of months after you and I spoke that we were able to open it and run the first few trials. And the hope is we'll test these new antivirals and things that will hopefully also work in conjunction with the vaccine, because as we know, not everybody wants to take the vaccine for their own personal reasons, but making sure that we have a wide array of things that will help people with the vaccine going forward. But really, the fact that the Hutch has been the leader in studying viruses and in the HIV vaccine trials network, all the vaccines that we've tested over the years and all the treatments we've tested for HIV have directly impacted the treatments and deaths. I mean, some of you have heard about when President Trump got sick and had to go to the hospital and got a test therapy called from Regeneron, which was monoclonal antibodies. That sort of therapy we pioneered for thinking about HIV, and that was the backbone of one of our HIV studies as well. And so, because we knew it could work with HIV, it got used for something like COVID-19, and the crosstalk is just amazing.
Okay, that is very interesting. Yeah, since we're already here at the cross between other viruses that we have, like I think we in summer we've also talked about the original SARS. In how far has the research of that virus had an impact on COVID-19?
So it's I'll say this much. So the original SARS that happened in 2003, which was this is very closely related to one of the issues was that it was contained really quickly, so nobody actually did that much research. And once it was contained, one of the hardest parts was getting research funding to do any work on that virus. But it was because of that virus that people started looking for antibodies that could fight that original SARS. And so when this one came along, because the spike proteins are so similar, we already had antibodies that could potentially work. And that's probably the Regeneron drugs and the Eli Lilly drugs that have hit the market, is sort of based on the work from the original SARS. But if you look at it globally and think about how different parts of the world have fought the virus, the places that got hit worse by SARS originally were China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea. And what they learned from that first time around, they put into practice a series of steps that when this virus came along, 17 years later, those same steps have prevented those countries from having truly, truly bad outbreaks. And so it's sort of a muscle memory that's helped out South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. The rest of us just didn't learn from them, and that's kind of sad, to be honest.
I see. So it was more like in the eastern countries where the original SARS was really present, that we there have like less impact of COVID-19.
Absolutely true. And they had a system in place, and they you know the everybody banded together because they knew how bad the 2003 SARS was. And hopefully, the rest of the world will now be on guard, because, to be honest, this is not the last virus that's going to jump over from animals to humans. Given the rate that they're jumping over, we're probably looking at another one in the next 6 to 8 years again, unfortunately. Hopefully not as bad, hopefully only as bad as like MERS in 2012-13, which didn't affect that many people. But there are likely to be other spillover events going forward.
So another question I have here, which I can probably combine with a question in chat in here, is that there are big vaccination centers basically where people are saying that they will be ready by the middle of December. So do you think that it is realistic to have at least some small amount of the vaccine to be ready by then, or do you think that it is something completely unrealistic? And how do you envision the distribution of the successful vaccine to the population at large then?
Oh, that is a great question, and it is a hard question, to be honest. So truthfully, really, there's only two vaccines that have reached full trial that we can be confident about, and that's the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. And those are the first two that are out of the gate. And they rely on a brand new technology that's never been used to make a vaccine ever before. So this will be the first vaccine that has been made with this new technology. And it's using a very unstable substance called mRNA, which our body has a lot of, but it's outside of the body, it's super unstable, and it has to be sort of encased in fat or something else to protect it. So the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, the whatever formulation they use to protect it isn't great, and it needs to be maintained at negative 70 degrees Celsius, which is just really cold, colder than Antarctica, if you will. It has to be held that cold all the way from production till the moment it enters your arms. And so distributing that will be really tricky in resource poor countries for sure. But even in places like the US and the UK, it'll be hard to get that vaccine out to people. The Moderna vaccine is slightly better. Their fat formulation keeps it protected at minus 20 degrees, but it can be kept at 4 degrees as well. So your standard refrigerator. And so getting that out will be fairly easy as well. But realistically, we won't have enough of those viruses to vaccinate more than maybe 100, 150 million people by March or April. Because the problem is both of those vaccines need 2 doses to be effective. And to get to those 2 doses, you basically need to make 300 doses by mid-April. And so it's likely to go to frontline workers, healthcare workers, people who are most at risk first. So I don't know how realistic it is to get vaccines into people by mid-December. It's fundamentally possible if you choose there are some other vaccines that are not specific to COVID that show some protection. So maybe that's what they're talking about. But just a COVID specific, we're likely to get approval mid-December for 1 or 2, but it's unlikely that it will be available to the general public before next spring at the earliest.
See. So we still gotta hang in there a bit.
Unfortunately, yes. But I mean, if you think about it, right, like as long as we are maintaining physical distance and wearing masks, honestly, like if 80% of the population wore masks all the time, 80% of the population wore masks whenever they were outside their family unit, and those masks were multi-layer cloth masks, we could stop this pandemic. that's it. Like the masks are just as effective as vaccines, but just because they haven't been made by like some doctor or something, or they've been politicized, people aren't taking to it. But honestly, just wearing masks will stop this pandemic dead in its tracks.
Yeah, indeed. Something actually on that note that I wanted to ask a bit. Something you mentioned earlier was that sometimes there are people who might feel a bit more reluctant about taking the vaccine. For some people, that may be for reasons such as one you already mentioned, such as maybe leaving it, maybe for the people who might need it more, such as essential workers or people at risk. And one I feel like common reason where that people often tell you, when they'll often tell you, for instance, oh yeah, I mean, sure, it's good we've got this vaccine, but we've never had a vaccine so fast, so side effects. I'm scared of them. Basically, like normally under normal circumstances, I would take them, but because of that, they feel scared. Like from your more informed perspective, what's your opinion on, for instance, that kind of statement from people? Like, do you think they're justified in their fear, or what do you think?
So I can understand where they're coming from, right? Like the record for a vaccine before has been 4 years. It's taken 4 years. That's been the fastest ever that we've gotten a vaccine to market. So to go in less than a year, I can understand where people are just a little hesitant. But I think what's happened this time around is slightly different in that it's just the 4 years is because we sort of wait for one phase to complete before we start another. This time we've sort of started running multiple phases at the same time. And the first phase is safety, and that was completed earlier in the year where people got doses and they looked for side effects. Truthfully, you're right. Like, not enough time has gone since we put the vaccine in people that we know that there won't be any super long-term side effects. But given that there was no side effects early on with some of these formulations, I feel confident that there's not likely to be as much of a safety issue. I think there's a bunch of independent review boards and bioethicists and other experts, including experts from the Hutch, who'll be sitting and evaluating the safety and efficacy of these vaccines before saying, yes, we'll allow the Food and Drug Administration to provide an emergency use authorization. Because with vaccines, you're right, like it's a different barrier. When you're sick, any drug that will prevent death, sure, we don't care about the side effects, it just prevented death. But with a vaccine, we have healthy people, we're putting something in their bodies, we want to make sure that nothing bad happens. And so far, nothing bad has happened. And I trust our oversight boards and our groups that will look into the data more clearly and say, no, I think it's okay, it's safe to put it out. But we'll keep reviewing. It's not like once the vaccine goes out, we stop looking at safety. We can keep looking for years and years and say, okay, here's the safety profile. If you got the vaccine, maybe you should be on the lookout for these things in your body or be wary about these things. But I would, if the independent review board, which is meeting in, I guess, in 2 weeks, says it's okay, I trust them and I would go forward with it.
Another question I have that I can probably combine with another chat question in here is a question sounds maybe a bit weird at first, but how has the pandemic now, outside of the illness, with all the other stuff, with the physical distance, with just the now I'm lacking the words, with stuff just shutting down, and in general also the politicization of masks and the outright rejection of medical science. How has this all affected your ability to do research and spread the word?
That's a great question. And it's not affected our ability to do research. So our research is able to move forward at full speed, and that's necessary. And there's people that believe in the research and need for the research. but it's definitely highlighted one thing that scientists have to be better at is talking about our science. And, there should be more scientists who join me on these Twitch calls talking to people. And, we have to learn, we as scientists have to learn how better to communicate to the public in a manner that is human and in a manner that they can understand, they can relate. Like, you know, talk about why they believe in the science. Just because the gap between science and people has just grown so wide. And I think science needs to do a better job of trying to reach back to those people and explain, hey, this is why we're doing it. This is why we think it's effective. We're thinking about you. We're thinking about your family when we do this. And it's not just, you're not just an experiment. You should take it because it's good for you. Understand where people are coming from and try to explain better. And so I think this is a real wake up call to science about how we need to break down barriers and be more accessible for sure.
Yeah. Pika, maybe you want to ask some other chat questions again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's a question that's been there in the chat for some time, and I think it's actually quite interesting to ask. It's not necessarily directly about COVID-19 itself, but basically the question is, this has nothing to do with COVID, but are there any numbers about normal flu? Is normal flu not as much a problem as usual? Are there lower numbers because of the restrictions, social distancing, and hygiene awareness, or is it the same like every year? Because indeed, we have to remember that it's not like COVID is the only illness in the world because it's there. There's also everything else.
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
That's a great question. And the correct answer is that we've stopped the flu basically. So there's different cycles of the flu. So the flu circulates in fall, winter, early spring. So in the northern hemisphere, that starts around October, November, and goes to about March. And in the southern hemisphere, it starts at around March and goes through about August, September. And this year in the southern hemisphere, because of all the restrictions and the lack of travel and all social distance, there was no flu in the southern hemisphere, not at all. And so,
Wow.
whatever things we're doing to stop the spread of SARS-CoV-2 is also stopping the spread of flu. And so, in the northern hemisphere, we're hoping that it does the same, that we don't really have a bad flu season. But the sad reality is that the places that have contained SARS-CoV-2 are also likely to not have as big an outbreak of the flu, versus those that have not contained SARS-CoV-2 are also not taking steps to stop the flu and therefore are at risk for the flu. And those are the people who you want to be able to fight the flu. So it's a weird system. You don't want the two infections to hit together because we have no idea what that would do to your body, and it's likely not to be good. So, but if you've taken the precautions to stay away from SARS, you're likely protected from the flu as well. But if you've taken no protections, you're also at risk for the flu.
Okay, very interesting. Now now that you've said it like that, this kind of this may sound like a kind of a weird question again, but apart from this whole pandemic, if we look at this whole pandemic thing again, are there like any positives we can take from this? Sure, the pandemic is all
Yeah, I mean, we've basically
bad stuff. The pandemic but yeah, are there any good things?
Well, I mean, we figured out how to stop the flu basically. Like we just know that, if you wear masks in the fall, or at least a certain percentage of people wear masks in the fall, we can stop the flu. But the other big thing is that I don't think people recognize how amazing it is that we've managed to get a vaccine so quickly in an entirely untested new vaccine platform. So the unstable molecule, the mRNA that I was talking about, nobody's ever used it to make a vaccine. And this is a brand new technology that we've been able to use to make a vaccine in less than we knew the the sequence of the virus in January 11th, I believe. And by November, we have data that shows that we have an effective vaccine. That is almost science fiction to all scientists. Like, it is completely unbelievable that things have moved that quickly. And just the way science has come together to do this, there's so many new things that we've learned about the virus that are, new technologies that we've created to fight it that will be useful for years to come for many other viruses and pandemics. And the hope is that the next spillover event that could trigger a pandemic is not as bad because of all the lessons from this one.
Oh yeah, I've heard indeed. It's just thinking because it's not the first time indeed I hear about the fact that this vaccine developed with this new technology, and I love hearing about it because it shows how far things can go, like how things evolve. If what I'm saying here makes any sense, and it's definitely always reassuring to hear about the development of those techniques evolving with the development of vaccines, because it's always something that might seem a bit abstract to a lot of people. And actually, in that regard, we actually have one of the chat questions from earlier. Let me actually find it again. It says it's a question from Xunaris saying, as somebody who has no idea how any of this works, can you explain in simple terms what the process of finding a vaccine looks like?
Yeah. So basically, what the theoretical idea is that first you need to know what the virus looks like and what the virus structure is, and how it's infecting our cells. So step one is actually to figure out what is the class of virus, and therefore what does the outside look like, because you've got to be able to recognize the outside of the virus to be able to design treatments to stop it. So there's other treatments that you can have that will stop the virus making copies of itself once it's inside the cell. So things like remdesivir, which is being used in a clinical trial, affects the ability of the virus to make copies of itself. But to make a vaccine, you have to know what the outside of the virus looks like. So step one is figuring out what family the virus is from. And so okay, this is a coronavirus. Okay, that means that the structure is usually like this, and it has all these things on its surface. And because it's a coronavirus, that means it's a spike protein. So the next question is trying to figure out how that virus enters our cells. What is the key that it uses to unpick the lock in our body to allow itself into our body? And so then you look at that key and you say, we've got to find a way to not only recognize that key and tell our immune system, destroy anything with this key, but you want to be able to find a way to actually block the key from entering the lock. Because that way you're not just destroying the virus. While your immune system is coming to attack that key, it's not able to get into the cell and make a million more copies while you're still fighting what's left over. So step one is to find something that recognizes the outside of the virus. And you train things in your body called antibodies, which are these Y-shaped molecules that bind onto the surface of the virus and tag it for destruction and degradation. But the best kinds of antibodies are the ones that bind the key and prevent it from entering the lock. And those are called neutralizing antibodies. So you have to really drill down into the very specific subpart of the virus that is the key that allows it to get into the cells of our body, and find a way to block that key completely so that you can not only destroy it, but you can prevent it from making many more copies while you're destroying it. And so once you know that, you basically say, okay, this is the little subsection of the key, and we're going to train our body to recognize it. So we're going to put a small piece of this virus in our body. So just this small outside piece of the virus, not the whole virus, not so for these technologies, for the mRNA, it's just you put in the sequence that once you put it into your body will make this very small piece of the virus to train the rest of your immune system of what to fight. And that's what it is you're just putting in the smallest piece of the virus that you want your body to recognize and destroy, but it's not enough to cause any other infection. So the only side effects really should be your immune system is getting hyperstimulated because there's no virus. It's only just the tiniest, smallest piece of the virus. And so that's what these vaccine technologies are, is finding a way to train your body to recognize the smallest possible piece of the virus that will prevent the virus from entering your cells, but will also promote degradation and destruction of the virus.
Wow, thank you for the explanation, and I really hope that also answered it for you, Xneris. But yeah, thank you so much. Wow, I really hope we'll actually be able to go through all the questions because it's already like we're almost on time now, and I'm like, no, we need more time.
Yeah, I just saw that as well, but I think we've got some more time to go in here because we have like we've started pretty late here as well.
But let's see. Do you have any more questions, Floa, perhaps, that you'd like to read from chat?
Yeah, let me just quickly scan the chat in here if we get something. Yeah, do you think that it is a risk that we do not have any of these long-term studies on the vaccines?
So just be assured that all of these vaccine trials, people will be followed in the vaccine trials for over 2 to 3 years. So we have results after 3 to 6 months, but everybody will be followed for 2 years. And as we learn things, science will come out and say, hey, this is what we know. Here's the safety for the vaccine after 6 months, after 9 months, after a year. And so we're not stopping once the vaccine is made. We will be monitoring the vaccine for years to come to make sure. Because again, that next piece, the really critical piece that I mentioned early on, the idea that what we've seen with these vaccines is it prevents people from getting sick, but we haven't seen that it prevents people from getting infected. And that data won't be clear until a year or two down the line. So what's fundamentally possible is you still get the virus and you're able to spread a little bit of the virus, but you may not get sick. And so that understanding whether you're able to get the virus and spread it is really critical to understanding how many people need to get vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. And I can talk more about herd immunity if people have questions of that.
Actually, like in that regard, actually another question from Moontoon here. Actually, in the regard, of testing and that kind of subject, there's a question here that says, do you think mass testing is better than only testing people with symptoms? Is it not better to find asymptomatic cases with mass testing because those people can infect a lot of people without knowing it? Yeah.
That's a perfect question, and I agree. Yeah, mass testing is the right way to go because what we've discovered about this virus is that 80 to 85% of the people who get the virus will not spread it to others. Most of the spread of the virus happens from 10 to 15% who are spreading to 100 people, to 200 people. So these super spreader events. The way this virus moves is through super spreader events. People are most infectious about 2 days before, from about 2 to 3 days before they show symptoms to the day they show symptoms. So in that 3-day window, they're putting out a ton of virus. And if they run into like going to the grocery store, they're going to work, and they're seeing 100 people, and they're able to infect 100 people, that's how this virus moves forward. So mass testing would allow us to know and be like, oh, you're putting out a ton of virus, maybe stay indoors for the next 3 to 4 days, because that would also shorten our quarantine windows as well by being able to do mass testing. I think mass testing is what we absolutely need, but we're not at capacity. So there's a few issues with that. One is that we don't have enough tests available. We need more tests, and we need tests that are rapid and effective. That we can't swab our nose, send it to a place, wait for 2 days. Because in that 2 days, if you see 20 people and you're able to infect all 20, well, what's the use? So we need to be able to make it more rapid and more widespread.
That's true. That's true indeed. Regarding the logistics even of mass testing, that's really the main issue. But if we were to be able to get past this barrier, we'd be able to that would really help, because the idea of getting tested, sometimes because of the limitation of the amount, it means that usually most people will only get tested only if there's an actual concrete reason. But
And
mass
honestly,
testing,
Pika,
yeah. Yeah, go
Pika,
ahead.
that's what you see in places which are showing high percent positive. If the percent positivity is really high, it means that they don't have enough testing to do mass testing, and they're only testing the really sick people. And that's why it's like 30%, 40% positives, which is because they just don't have enough tests. You really want to get to a place where you're seeing less than 2% positive, because that means that you have the ability to test. You have way more tests than you have infected people, and you can scale up at that point to do mass testing.
I see.
I have another
go ahead.
really interesting question from chat in here. Mutun is asking, do you think it would be okay for me to visit my 75-year-old mother on Christmas? Should I wear a mask all the time? Should I self-quarantine like for 5 days before visiting? Should I make an antigen or PCR test? I have to pray for it in my country if I don't have symptoms. I think at the moment I shouldn't go at all, but I would like to hear your opinion.
That instinct is right. It is, at the moment, there's just most of Europe and the US is in a peak, and it would be unwise at the present moment to go visit anybody that you don't see on a regular basis. So, and the problem with testing is you get the test, and the test is a snapshot in time. It's possible you go in to get the test, and at that moment you're negative, but you walk out, and while walking out, you run into somebody who coughs on you, who's positive. Then it doesn't matter that you tested negative, because you've still exposed yourself to the possibility of getting infected after that. So it is dangerous. If you have to visit your 75-year-old mother for Christmas, and I understand, right? Like, I miss my family. Like, we just did Thanksgiving here in the US last night, and normally I do it with my brother and my sister-in-law, and we're all cooking and joking, and we didn't do it this year. So I really understand that. And it's, if you have to do it, you would ideally meet the people outdoors, not in an indoor environment where the air is not moving. Outdoors where there's free movement of air, and both people with masks and staying 6 feet apart. So if you have a patio or an outdoor area where you can sit 6 feet apart and visit while wearing masks, that is safer. But if you can't adhere to those, it's a big risk, and I don't know whether I would do that. I'm very risk averse. And to me, that does not. The risk is too great for me to take.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying here. I think so many of us here, like at the end of this year, are probably in a similar dilemma, and I think that's what's harsh about this pandemic. For instance, for me, I likewise don't know. For me, I've basically accepted that I probably won't be seeing my family for Christmas. But at the same time, you can't take the risk of spreading the virus if you get exposed, especially for me, since it would involve like taking the plane and all that. And I'm not sure this is a risk I would like, to spread. So it's a terrible dilemma we all have to face for this end of year, because especially vicious, because Thanksgiving for you guys in the US, or Christmas for a large part of the world, it's normally a period where we all get reunited, but we all have to make these compromises to ensure everyone's safety, which is not easy. We all wish it was different, but hopefully we'll hopefully by this time next year we'll be able to not have to do the same thing. We'll see.
And for all Indians, right? Like it was Diwali a few weeks ago, which is our big,
indeed.
it's effectively, I'm Bengali, so we celebrate something called Kali Puja or Kali Puja, which is different but same to Diwali. But you're right. Like this is the period where we meet with family and we celebrate all the year has given us, and it's going to be so hard. And if you were, yeah, the weird thing is that being in the plane itself is probably lower risk, but everything leading up to the plane and after the plane is super high risk. So, but one thing you could do, and I've spoken to my brother about, is the possibility that if we quarantine and I just jump in my car and drive a long distance, either staying in the car till we visit. That's an option if you really have to, but it's not optimal for anybody as well.
I see. I think. Go ahead.
Oh no, Pika, please go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, because we're almost on time, which I hate saying because, like, I think compared to the schedule, we still need to move on. But so I think now is the time to start perhaps thinking about the final question before we have to close, because otherwise we'll be late.
I'll buy you some time for the last question by basically jumping in and saying thank you to all of you who are joining and just to listen, just to learn, and those who support. We're grateful to all of you for your partnership with the Hutch. Like it was so good to see you guys 6 months ago. We're fortunate that you called us back again 6 months later. It's just so great to see a community that is so engaged, and we can't do what we do without you. So thank you to all of you. And Pika, thank you. It's always great chatting with you. And Floa, it's been great chatting with you this year as well. So
thank you.
Before we even take the last question, I just want to thank you all and thank all the organizers of Bingothon for thinking of us. We really appreciate it.
Speaking of that this goes right in hand with what I wanted to say is there are a lot of messages in chat that are really grateful of you there who are like, thank you so much for answering all of our questions in here. That is thank you so much. There are a lot of messages in here that are just thankful and and they are really happy that they learned something, and
pretty much, because it's not every day you get that opportunity. But now now how to find that final question before going. I don't even know. There's so many things we could ask. So what conclusive thing could we ask you? If anybody even in chat has a conclusive question they'd like to ask, now is the time, because after that, it's not, as I said, it's not every day you get that kind of opportunities. Because otherwise we might just be a bit late with the next run. So let's see.
I do indeed have a question, but I'm not sure if it's such a great question to close in. So just to give like an estimate, Guppy, like what do you think? When could we call this? When do you think an estimate when this whole pandemic is over?
So there's two ways to think about it. I think most of the people should be doses for enough people to start getting many people to start getting the vaccine by next summer. And that's the hope, is that by next summer into next fall, we're starting vaccinations and people are starting to get vaccinated, and we can start coming out of this. We're probably going to see the effect of this pandemic for a little while, for sure. And there's every possibility that the first dose of vaccine is good, but we may need a booster in a year. So
Mm.
we'll get back to something resembling normal by possibly late summer, early fall next year. So September-ish next year. But I think we'll be feeling the remnants of this for a little bit as we still come to grips with this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions in here. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of our questions in here. And yeah, we are gonna wrap this interview up in here. So maybe any final words from you, Guppy?
No, just standard. Thank you all for all your partnership. Please, while we wait for the vaccine, continue good safety habits of watch the 3 Ws, watch your distance, stay 6 feet apart from everybody who's not your family, wear a mask, and wash your hands for 20 seconds or more from coming in. And if you do that, we can make it to when we have the vaccines. Vaccines aren't available yet. Please hold out. Please follow the 3 Ws and keep each other safe and look after one another. So thank you.
On my side, my final words will be, first off, well, thank you, Guppy. It was lovely to have you again, really. And I just want to say, let's just stay hopeful for the next year or so about what will happen. Let's just hope that all this research, all this effort will pay off, all the efforts also on everyone's side with the safety measures. It will pay off eventually, and it will be great when it will happen. But yes, also thank you to everyone in chat who was here to ask questions or just watch. Seriously, thank you so much to you all. Up next, right after this, we'll go into an intermission, and our next run will be Road Trip Adventure. So definitely get hyped for that. So definitely take some time during the intermission to rest, think about everything that Guppy has said, because there's definitely a lot of value here that's been said. So yeah, thank you again for attending. Thank you. Even if you can't donate to the cause, even spreading the word about the event or about the organization, about Fred Hutch, it's another way of support, about Bingothon, everything. So thank you, and bye.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you.
That was a great interview there from Guppy, from Fred Hutch. And welcome back to Bingothon Winter 2020. I'm Lego, and I'm joined here by Nordic Soy, here in the host booth for the next few hours. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Friday morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you had a fantastic week and are having a even more fantastic Friday. We do have a donation that came in during the interview. We didn't want to interrupt, obviously. Guppy with a lot of great information about the progress of the COVID-19 research over at the Hutch. And Nordic, do you want to read that out?
Absolutely. So yeah, it looks like we've got $10 coming in from JP. Says, hello, it's JP. Thank you for having me and for the rest of the Monster Rancher 2 runners on. It was a super fun time. Love the work you guys are doing and love the fact that I was able to play my favorite game for charity. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Guppy for answering questions. Great to show this to some of my friends and family who were nervous about the vaccine for COVID. Shoutouts to Jack for getting up off our butts and getting us to submit Monster Rancher 2. And shout out to NGen for volunteering to do commentary instead when we had too many runners. One last thing, for anyone curious, my final time was 3 hours, 19 minutes, and 15 seconds for the Monster Rancher 2 Double Bingo. And please put my $10 towards making Super Mario Odyssey a blackout. Love watching that game. Well, JP,
such a fantastic game.
Oh, absolutely. So, JP, thank you for the wall of text to read, and we do appreciate that $10. Yeah, we're going to hang out here for a little bit until we get our next run going with Cave Lighter and the Road Trip Adventure Double Bingo.
Yeah, and as was mentioned in the donation, there is a incentive to make Super Mario Odyssey a blackout bingo. It is $10 off its goal, but there is a more immediate incentive that you may want to consider donating to Fred Hutch for. Road Trip Adventure will be a bingo, but if you want to have our runner Cave Lighter get to the end of the game and beat it, that is $5 more to meet that incentive. So definitely consider donating to meet that incentive before the end of the run. And if you donate, there's lots of prizes available for you: mugs, perlers, and of course a copy of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity at $10, $15, and $20 respectively. Definitely keep those in mind. Those are cumulative across the entire event. We're at $331, just a short 7 hours in or so to our weekend of bingo action.
Come on, somebody's got to have $5 out there. And if you got 10, that's going to get you in for one of those mugs. And come on, you know how much how awesome.
Yeah, the mugs are a hot ticket item, as are both the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and the Perlers. If you haven't seen the pictures of them, check out when the links get posted in the chat. They are pretty spectacular, made for us by one of our designers, member of the community. Just getting last confirmation here from our runners before we kick it on over to them. Coming up next, Road Trip Adventure. But after that, Yakuza 0 Blackout Bingo, a co-op Blackout Bingo, as well as Super Metroid after that. A full day of bingo action is going to be coming your way, so do not miss a minute. Keep following us here on Speedruns Live, as well as over on the main Bingothon Twitch channel for this and so much more bingo action all weekend long. But with that, we're going to be tossing it over to Cave Lighter and iBot02 for Road Trip Adventure, a double bingo solo match right here on Bingothon Winter 2020.